All right. Well, let's continue the conversation when we talk about energy and so forth, right? Craig Rucker is a co-founder of CFACT and currently serves as its president, widely heralded as a leader in the free market environmental think tank in Washington, D.C. CFACT co-hosts the 16th Annual International Conference on Climate Change in Vienna. Happened just recently, and I want to welcome you back to the program, Craig. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. Always a pleasure.
So scientists, engineers, energy policy experts all over the world gathered in Vienna, June 13th, 14th, and 15th to make the case for climate realism, happened in Austria. And tell me what this means. What is climate realism? Oh, and I'm going to preface that by saying this weekend, over the weekend, Saturday, it was 85 degrees in Michigan. It's late June. Of course it's 85 degrees. I'm getting warnings on my phone about, heat advisories. It's 85. Well, it feels like 96 with the humidity. It's 85 degrees. I'm getting warnings on my phone. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Why don't they just put it out there? Warning, June to September. It's summer. Be careful. I mean, really? Seriously. All right, go ahead.
Now, you bring up a couple interesting topics there, Steve. I was going to say one of the things we've been on talking quite a bit now is trying to put this whole heat wave into perspective. So before I get to Europe, there's been NOAA data out there, and we've been putting it out that the number of excessively hot days, these are days that are over 90, 95, 100, 105 degrees, according to NOAA data, between 1901 and 1959, there were 18% more days that were registered, particularly in the 1930s, which during the Dust Bowl era was the hottest time ever. 18% more days that it had that sort of heat than from 1961 to 2020. So for climate change to have be getting worse and worse, it was actually worse in the early part of the century,
Of course
which
it
is
was.
many people say is before climate change could have been responsible for it. So,
Right. We also had more tornadoes in the 1950s and the 1970s. Those two decades were terrible for tornadoes. We've had seasons of hurricanes far worse than we've seen recently. We went 11 years without a significant Category 3 or better hurricane in America, longest stretch that they've ever recorded until just recently. I mean, this idea that storms are getting more severe, no, they're not. Well, look at the damage in Florida. Well, yeah. Florida went from 5 million people in 1960 to 25 million today. You've got a concentration of wealth and people and buildings. Yeah, when a hurricane hits today, it's going to be a lot more expensive. Has nothing to do with the climate, does it?
no, it doesn't. And it's that sort of, that's what we call climate realism. And that's why we gathered in Vienna, Austria. We had a kind of a heavy hitting team out there. People like Nobel Prize winner John Clauser, who won in 2022 for physics. We had Will Happer, a renowned climatologist from Princeton University, a former Trump science advisor. We had other people like Willie Soon, and he's from Harvard Smithsonian, just a number of European scientists that gathered for the purpose of trying to point out stats like you just mentioned and we just mentioned to showcase that this whole issue that climate change is going to destroy us, we need to give up our liberties, is just not founded in science. And fortunately, people are starting to listen. Our Vienna conference came on the heels of a very encouraging election where the Greens lost over a third of their power. Places like Germany, they went from about 21 seats down to 12. Portugal, they got cleaned out as they did in France. They barely hung on to even exist as a party now. So we're seeing some serious pushback. I think it's time for us to actually not just say that their policies are bad, which they are. They're trying to gut us of our energy, but it's actually bankrupt on scientific fact when it comes to things like climate change.
Right. Now, climate change is real. I mean, I'll just put it
Oh,
out
of
there.
course. Yes.
Climate change is real, Craig. I know because I live in Michigan. I'm surrounded by the Great Lakes. 10,000 years ago, those were sheets of ice up to a mile thick where I'm sitting, right? Half to a mile thick. Of course there's climate change. It just isn't your fault or mine. It's cyclical. It's mathematical. It's all of these frequencies, the way the planets rotate, the sun rotates, the way the atmosphere and the solar system work. It's all related, and it's things a lot bigger than me driving to work today, isn't it?
Well, and that's what we're trying to say. When you mention that when they say you're a climate change denier, what they're talking about is what that man is the principal driver of this climate. And they say you're a denier if you think, for example, what you just said, that natural variation, because all the stuff you talked about with the ice sheets and everything else occurred long before our SUVs or our power plants
I
could have
don't know.
impacted
Maybe
that.
those dastardly mammoths were driving, Suburbans to work. I couldn't say if I wasn't there, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, and we find just evidently, and this has always been a powerful fact for me personally, because I love history. When you read about things like they have the Mendenhall Glacier in Alaska,
Yep.
and it's been melting for the last 200-300 years, and they find a whole forest under it that they didn't know existed until the glacier melted, and that forest existed 1,000 years ago,
Right.
which meant that either the forest back in the old days grew underneath glaciers, or perhaps a glacier wasn't there.
Oh, you mean the glacier came later, like in Greenland and Iceland, where in Greenland from about 900 AD to about 1300 AD, maybe a little bit later, the farming on Greenland was fantastic because there was a warm period in history, right?
Yep, and that's why the Vikings were able to settle many of those areas that today still can't grow the types
Right.
of grain or the types of grapes they had.
Craig, maybe we haven't given, enough credence to mammoth flatulence. Maybe it was mammoth flatulence that caused the glaciers to melt. Just like cows today are destroying the planet, maybe it was mammoth flatulence back then. I mean, we should consider these things. I mean, if I'm going to be a climate, a Green New Deal kind of guy, I got to pay attention to these things, don't I?
You're right, and unfortunately, one of our political parties seems to be wedded to this. And they're even allowing kids, such as they did in Hawaii just recently, to sue the government over their futures being jeopardized because there's not enough action on climate change. And they were awarded, I think, what was it, $40 million? It's crazy stuff that's going on. You see the defacing of Stonehenge by climate activists, and people truly carried away with this alarmism when in fact there's nothing to be particularly alarmed about. Whether, like you mentioned, on hurricanes, tornadoes, heat waves, things of that sort, we have a tremendous panic out there, and that's why we did the Vienna conference. We'll do another one in America, and next year maybe even in South America as well, to
I'm
try
gonna,
to
which I
do
think
our
you
part.
should. This is important. I'm going to give one statistic here before we go. There hasn't been an F4 or better tornado in Michigan since 1977. Mark it down, but not since 1970. Storms are getting worse, yet we haven't had an F4 or F5 tornado in Michigan since 1977. Almost my entire life. Pretty weird
Well,
considering things are supposed
well,
to be so bad, right?
you may just have facilitated the way they redefined them. They've actually done that with hurricanes.
I
They've
know they
actually
do.
changed,
Well, they
they
redefined
changed what
they
enough.
redefined tornadoes too. The way the wind severity, they've lowered the threshold, and the idea that we have more tornadoes now than we did before 1985 or 1990 is garbage. We have Doppler radar now. We can see them better. We can understand them better. We have better science. Period. You know that, Craig. Greatly appreciate you being here always, Craig Rucker. You come back anytime. Always appreciate you bringing a pile of common sense from CFACT. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Really appreciate it. It's just, look, is it getting warmer? Sure. It's summer. Gonna get colder? Yeah, it's winter. Are we trending upwards? Yeah, I have for about 11,700 years, give or take. It's called climate change. It's real, but it's not your fault or mine, all right? We'll be right back.